Good morning, this is Karen Rainford. I'm here to talk to you about Chapter 7 of Project Management Jumpstart. What should I study in risk management? I'm going to just step away from the chapter and use a different mnemonic that I've found very helpful called the ALARM mnemonic, A-L-A-R-M. And that talks about approaching risks, listing risks, analyzing them, responding to them, and then monitoring. First, the approach. All projects are uncertain. If a risk would occur, the threats can negatively impact the project objectives. If opportunities occur, they would positively impact the project objectives. The thing about risk management is taking a proactive approach to planning for this uncertainty. So, we call it a risk management plan, and it's just a proactive approach to planning for uncertainty. Let's talk about developing a school carnival. Who's going to be involved in planning for risk? Definitely there's a whole planning group involved, but do you ever actually sit down in a separate meeting and just talk about what might go wrong or what might go exceptionally well and how to make sure that those things are taken care of? So who would be involved in that meeting? How long would they spend on risk planning? How are they going to identify a list of possible threats and opportunities? How would they decide, once they have that list, which ones are really important and which ones are just not a big deal? And how would they change the project plan to reduce the uncertainty in the project? Creating a list of risks is an important part. Identify threats and opportunities. There are different kinds of risks, known, unknown, and what we might call unknown unknowns, like the events of September 11th, which impacted every project that was going on in the world, or in the United States, certainly at that time. Constraints are a good source of risks. You can get a complete list by going through every element on your work breakdown structure and task list and asking what might go wrong or how it could go much better than planned. Look at critical success factors, business risks, vendors, external risks from the external organization, city, state, country, and finally, look at how complex your project is and what your abilities and the abilities of your team are. There are many techniques that you can use for coming up with a list of potential risks. Look at past projects, brainstorm. Use experts, both individually and then later in groups. Use nominal group techniques to help categorize risks and look at different risk causes and effects. Interview people who've had problems in previous projects or people whose projects went well. And look at checklists of common risks that are available on the website, on the World Wide Web, and certainly in other places. Once you have a list of risks, what if you were so good at identifying or listing that you wound up with 100 risks? You can't deal with 100 risks, and not every risk has equal value. So you need to look at two things. Fortunately, risks have only two really important characteristics. How likely is that risk to occur? And if it did occur, what would the impact be? High, medium, low, good, bad? So there are some ways to assign ratings, and part of those ratings depend on risk tolerance in your organization. If you work for a startup company, risk tolerance is very different than if you work for a very old, established family company. One of the easiest ways to look at this is to work with a P&I matrix. For example, we can, on the left matrix, we can put probability low at the bottom, high at the top. On the bottom axis, we can put impact, low at the left, high at the right. Then anything that falls over here in the low probability, low impact sector, we can probably ignore. The ones that we want to focus our time on, and we know this for sure, are the high probability and high impact risks. What we don't know is how many of the low probability, high impact ones, or high probability, low impact. Those are things that we have to decide depending on how likely they are and how high the impact is. Once you have designated which risks you want to deal with, you need to respond to the threats. It's a matter of changing your project plan to reduce threats by decreasing the likelihood that the risk will occur or decreasing the impact if that risk does occur. There are 3 ways to do this, really. You can avoid the risk by changing the project plan so that's not part of it. If you think that bungee jumping is going to be very risky at your school carnival, you can simply take that out of scope and avoid that risk. You can transfer the risk to someone else by buying insurance, by bringing in an outsourcer, or by bringing in some specialist who is exceptionally good at dealing with that risk. You can mitigate the risk by reducing the probability of it occurring or reducing the impact if it does occur. For example, if you have a risk of injuries, you can reduce the impact if it does occur by having trained EMTs available and by having a first aid kit on site. And finally, you can determine that accepting the risk makes the most sense because you can't really deal with it effectively. Responding to opportunities is an important part of risk management planning. Change your plan, your project plan, to capitalize on opportunities by increasing the probability that the event will happen or improving the impact if it does occur. For example, in your school carnival, you can exploit the opportunity of having double the people that you planned on showing up by trying to make it happen by improved advertising. You can enhance the opportunity if it does happen by having plans to deal with the extra people. You can share that with another organization by planning to partner together and perhaps combine 2 events, or you can accept it. After risk response planning, you are in the monitoring stage. What you need to do is get those changes into the project plan so that they actually happen. Deal with any remaining uncertainty by developing a contingency plan, something to do if it does happen, and being aware that you have to accept those residual risks that cannot be planned away. On an ongoing basis, risks need to be monitored. So, in conclusion, the difference between informal risk management, talking about what might go wrong, and formal risk management, planning proactively, is talking openly about risks, writing down what you discuss, and keeping those risks in sight. That's the end of Chapter 7.